Good morning, everybody. I want to begin by thanking Manting for translating in advance. Whoops.
Manting is not doing too good.
I also want to thank, I always enjoy being here with the young adults and having them lead us, and their meaningful singing. So thank you very much.
每次我来到这里的话，我都很高兴遇到特别是成人们，与他们能够见面。
Well, today is Father's Day, and we decided to talk about some teaching that Jesus gave about what our Heavenly Father is like.
今天我们要查考的是看看我们的天父是怎么样一个天父。
And Wynn is going to come and read the 15th chapter of Luke for us in English, and you can follow along on the Chinese if you wish.
我也会把这个路加福音第15章跟我们读一遍，那么我都不会重复用中文读，然后大家会看到那个 PowerPoint 的时候跟着。
So as she reads, I want you to notice this is called, or we've called this the three lost things. But I want you to see if you see a fourth lost thing.
我们要看看有3个观点，但是你们可以看一看有没有第4个。
Okay.
The parable of the lost sheep. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep." I tell you that in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. The parable of the lost coin. Or, suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp? And search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin." In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels over one sinner who repents. The parable of the lost son. And one translation calls this the parable of the compassionate father. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants." So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. "Your brother has come," he replied, "and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound." The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him." "My son," the father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found."
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, this is a set of 3 parables that are very famous that Jesus told. Maybe one of the most famous in the whole Bible, of the prodigal son.
这里有3个的比喻，但是其中最有名的就是浪子回头这个故事。
But we want to ask, what is the context, what is the setting in which Jesus told these stories?
我们要想一想，这个耶稣这个上文下理啊，这个在什么情况底下耶稣讲这几个比喻呢？
So it seems that a lot of disreputable people and sort of outcasts of society were listening to Jesus and enjoying his company.
这里有2群不同的人，有一些是很高贵很有名望的人，但是从另外一个另一方面的话，也有很多地下层的人在听。
You remember Jesus was accused by the leaders of the Jewish leaders of being a wine bibber and a publican, or eating too much and drinking too much.
我们记得有些人对耶稣一些评论者说，要不是他是喜欢跟喝酒的人一起喝酒，还是跟很多喜欢吃东西的人一起在吃饭。
And let's remind ourselves of a little bit of history. We're talking about Palestine, the Jewish people there, but they were controlled by the Roman government, the Roman Empire.
我们知道当时是巴勒斯坦这个地方的话，是在罗马帝国的控制底下。
But as today in the Middle East, the religious leaders can be a very powerful influence on the people.
但是在那时候，甚至在今天的话，中东的宗教的领袖是有很大的权柄。
And in fact, the Pharisees, who were very strict fundamentalists, Jewish followers, and the teachers of the law, held very great power over the people.
法利赛人在当时的话，不单是在律法的教育，还在宗教的圈子里面都有很大的权利。
About the only thing they couldn't do was to order someone to be executed.
唯一他们不能够做的是判任何人死刑。
And that's why when Jesus was put on the cross, the Jewish leaders took him to the Roman government for that decision.
所以我们记得他们想把耶稣钉在十字架上之后，他们不能够做，只能够请求这个当时的罗马官来做这件事。
But now many people were flocking to hear Jesus, and the religious rulers began to be jealous and afraid.
当时的话，当这些领袖们看到这么多人围着耶稣要听耶稣讲话的时候，他们都产生了很大的嫉妒。
They were afraid, of course, that they might lose their own power.
因为他们害怕他们自己的权柄会失去。
And they were also afraid that if many people followed Jesus, it might lead to some revolt, and then the Romans would crush them.
他们害怕当越来越多人跟从耶稣的时候，他们恐怕罗马的军队会把他们压碎。
So they were beginning to try to discredit Jesus in the eyes of the people.
所以他们希望在众人的面前把耶稣贬低。
So in this case, they said, "Why to the disciples? Why does your master eat with such crud people?"
所以他们就问那些门徒说：“为什么你们的老师跟这种撒等类的人来吃饭呢？”
And it's that context where Jesus then tells these three stories.
所以在这种的情况底下，耶稣讲了这三个的比喻。
Now, I like to notice that he did not enter into a big theological debate.
我们要注意一下，因为他们没有在这种情况底下与他们做一个宗教的辩论。
Because in a theological debate, you often don't change anybody's opinion. You just have a big debate, and nobody wins or loses.
所以当我们发觉，如果说在理论上、在哲学上的辩论并没有带来什么的好处。
But Jesus is a master teacher.
但是我们的主耶稣是一个很高等的一个老师。
So he tells these three stories that stick in your mind, even though you forget a kind of high-powered theological word.
所以他们讲了这几个比喻就算这个我们可以能够记起来，甚至会忘记那原来的辩论的题目。
So the first story he says, well, there was a man that had 100 sheep, but one wandered away.
第一个比喻是讲到有一个人有100只羊，有一只羊就是迷路了。
And he left the 99 in the desert, and he went and he found the one sheep.
他就把99只羊留在旷野，去寻找那一件迷失的羊。
I often wondered, well, was anybody looking after the 99? I hope.
我常常在怀疑他剩下的99只羊有没有人照顾。
But probably his friends did.
可能就是他的同伴会照顾那99只羊。
But he found this little sheep.
当他找到这个迷失的小羊的时候，
And he put it on his shoulders and brought it home.
他放在他的肩膀上，把它带回去。
And Jesus said he was very joyful, and he called his friends and said, "Rejoice, I found my lost sheep."
所以他十分的高兴，所以他回去的时候就召集他的朋友说：“我找到我迷失的羊了。”
And then he told a second parable, and he said, there was a woman who lost one of her 10 silver coins.
另外一个比喻是讲到一个女人，她有10个钱，她丢了一个。
Now, by the way, notice that these stories all don't involve high-powered concepts, but everyday scenes from life.
我们要注意到这些比喻，耶稣讲到的比喻都不是一个很高的理论，而且每天生活上我们可以认知可以明白的事。
So everyone could imagine, oh, perhaps a widow. All she has is these 10 coins, and she's lost them.
可能他们听到的时候说啊，这可能是一个寡妇，她把一个钱丢掉了。
And so she sweeps her house and she looks everywhere and she finds the lost coin.
她就到处在屋里面到处寻找她遗失的那个钱。
And she calls in her friends and says, "Rejoice with me, be glad, I found my coin."
当她找到的时候，她把她的朋友召去来了，告诉他们我找到我的钱了。
So, and each time Jesus says, and it's this way in heaven, there is more joy over the one person who is found lost than the others.
所以耶稣就说，在天国我们看到，当有一个人回转的时候，天上的欢乐比其他的人的跟其他的钱还高兴。
Now, if you were a Pharisee, you might be thinking, "Wow, big deal."
如果说你是法利赛人的话，你说，哎，大不了的事。
But now Jesus tells the third story, and if you're a Pharisee, you may be thinking, it's getting a little bit difficult here. I may be in the line of fire.
这当耶稣讲到浪子回头这个比喻的时候，他们其他的法利赛人可能说，哎，可能是针对我们来讲的。
So again, the story involves very common things: a father and 2 sons. And one son who wants to go out and live it up.
所以我们看到这里也是一个很平常的，就是说就有一个父亲，然后有2个儿子，然后有一个儿子走迷路了。
And so the young son says, "I want my inheritance now, and give it to me."
那个小儿子问父亲说：“我要我的遗产，把你的我的哪一份分给我？”
Now, be careful here, because in these parables, there's often a big, important point, but we don't want to emphasize too many little points.
所以有一点我们要注意的是，一般来讲，比喻是讲一个很大的重点，那么我们不要给那些小点的话，给我们这个带到别的地方去。
I mean, we might get into a side little eddy of arguing, well, was the father stupid to do this, to give this money?
可能我们说，哎，这个把钱分给孩子，父亲是不是太傻了？
But in Jesus' story, it just happens. The father gives the money, the young man goes away and spends it all in wild living.
但是在故事里面，我们要注意的是这个父亲实在把财产分给小儿子，而这个小儿子的话，就把这个钱全部花光了。
And then just about the time his money runs out in the story, a famine hits that land.
当这个钱快用尽的时候，当地发生了饥荒。
And then, sometimes if we're alert, I think we can see some funny things that happen in the Scripture.
但我们如果说警醒的话，我们就发觉有很多事情在圣经里面发生的时候。
Because Jesus, I think, smiling, tells the young man the only job he could get was feeding pigs.
所以我们发觉在这里的话，他提到这个小孩他所能够找到的食物，就是那些豆荚是给喂猪用的。
In China and in Iowa, pigs are good things.
但是如果说我们回到这个Iowa这个地方的话，猪是好事。
But in Jewish culture, you wouldn't dare go near a pig.
但是在犹太人的习惯的时候，犹太人是不会跟猪来接触的。
So, in this story, the young guy has to go out and feed the pigs, and he's starving. And I think there's irony here.
所以在故事里面，我们发觉这个年轻人饥饿到一个地步，他们要这个看守猪，而且要把猪喂好。
And in this famous story, as you know, finally the young man says, "I'm starving to death, and I remember that in my father's house, even the hired hands, servants, have plenty to eat, so I'm going to go home."
所以当小孩子觉到走路无穷的时候，他想到在家里的话，甚至在父亲的仆人当中也有足够吃的。
And so as he goes along, he rehearses what he's going to say to try to get his father to allow him to come back.
所以在还没有回去以前，他会练习一下，他会对父亲说什么话。
And he says, I will say, Father, I sinned against heaven and against you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.
他会这样说，他说父亲，对不起，我得罪神，也得罪了你，我不配做你的儿子。
He said, just let me live out with the hired servants and eat their food, and that's all I want.
所以我只求你我能够做一个工人，跟他们一起吃一起喝，就是我所求的。
And so as he's coming in Jesus' story, the father sees him a long way away.
当这个孩子在回到家的路上的时候，他的父亲远远就看到他。
And we can sort of imagine maybe every day the father is looking.
我们可以想象，这个父亲可能每天都去观望，看他的儿子会回来还是没有。
And he sees his son coming, and he runs out to greet him.
当他看到儿子回来的时候，他跑着去欢迎他。
And he hugs him.
他拥抱他。
And the son starts into his story. Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you, and blah, blah, blah. But the father doesn't seem to be listening.
但是当这个小孩向父亲说，他以前练习的说，我不配做你儿子，我要做你的工人，但是好像那个父亲没听到一样。
Because the father calls to one servant, he says, quick, get some new clothes out here, and get a family ring, and get some shoes for this guy's feet.
所以这个父亲就说对仆人说，你把袍子拿过来，把鞋子拿过来，把戒指拿过来。
And he says to another servant, he says, get the best meat we've got. We're going to have a big party of celebration.
对另外一个仆人，他可能说，你去把最好的肥牛犊把它宰了，我们要有一个很大的庆祝。
Because he says, this is my son, and he was lost, and now he's found.
就说我的儿子以前迷失了，现在已经找到了。
Well, I want you to imagine, let us imagine that we were there when the son returns and all this is happening.
让我们想一想，这个孩子回来的时候，父亲怎么去迎接他？
What do you notice?
你发觉了什么东西？
What do you smell?
你闻到的是什么？
The son has been with the pigs, right?
那么我们想象，这个小儿子曾经喂过很多的猪，
And he probably didn't stay in a nice hotel when he was home.
也没有住在很好的酒店。
And the father is embracing him.
但是他的父亲还是去拥抱他。
Now, as I thought of this story, I was remembering a few years ago we had a Bible discussion on campus during the lunch hour.
我还记得有好些日子以前我们中午有一个查经。
And there were several Chinese graduate students there.
参加的人其中有几个是中国的学生。
And I enjoyed learning a lot of things I didn't know.
我从他们身上学到很多我以前不知道的事情。
Because one of them said that he was from a small village in China.
其中一个学生他说，我是从一个小村里面出来的。
And he explained, he said, if somebody had a celebration, he said, it wasn't a private thing for that family, the whole village would come.
说在中国的话，村里面有什么喜庆的事情的时候，不是单是一家人去庆祝，乃是整个村里面的人也一起庆祝。
And everybody may bring some food, and everybody in the village participated.
就是说每一个家都会带一点东西来，跟哪个家庭来一起庆祝。
And he said, but everybody would say, father should not run.
但是其中有很重要，就是说父亲不能够离开。
But in Jesus' story, the father did.
在这个比喻里面，我们发觉耶稣讲到的天父。 那个父亲没有离开。
And now in the story, this party is going on, and then the older son comes in from the field.
当这个欢喜的宴会在举行的时候，他的大儿子回家了。
And he hears all this music and dancing going on. He said, "What's going on here?"
当他听到很多的音乐、很多欢乐的声音的时候，他说：“什么事情发生了？”
And when he finds out, he is angry.
当他明白那个原因的时候，他非常的不高兴。
And he said, and then the father comes out because he won't go into the party.
因为他的父亲出来跟他讲话，因为他不愿意进到去参加他们的庆祝。
And my Chinese student said he shouldn't have done that. He made his father lose face.
他说他大儿子不应该这样干，因为父亲要离开他的宾客来到外面去。
Because the older son stood outside and wouldn't go in.
因为他的大儿子站在外面不愿意进来，他的父亲就很焦虑。
And he says to his father, "Why are you doing this?" He said, "This is not fair. You never gave me even a small goat to have a party with my friends."
这个大儿子对父亲说：“这真是不公平。那么甚至我在这里这么辛苦，你连一只小羊也不给我们拿来跟我们的朋友庆祝。”
He said, "All these years I've followed the rules. I've done what you said. I've never wasted anything. And now look, you celebrate when this son of yours comes home."
多年来，我为你辛辛苦苦的工作，守你所有要对我所说的话，但是现在这个浪费你的所有的钱的一个小儿子回来，你反而为他庆祝。
Now, as I was thinking of this, my mind went back over the years because this part of the story I was always uncomfortable with.
我这个故事把我带回好几年前的一些事情，这个故事令我感到有点不安。
I felt resistance against this older son's part of the story.
我有一点不太喜欢这个大儿子这部分的故事。
I mean, I could tell that his attitude wasn't the best.
我知道大儿子的态度可能不好。
But the trouble was, what he said had a lot of truth in it.
但是我们思考一下，大儿子所讲的话实在有理。
And so for some years I thought, well, what's wrong with what he says?
我们很多年我在思考着说，他说的话里面错了在什么地方。
I mean, he's obeying all the rules. He always does everything the father wants. And the other guy does all the bad things. But now the other guy gets the party.
所以我在想，我多年做所有的事情都是对的，我也听他的话，但是反过来另外一个儿子这样子不听话的话，反而父亲为他来庆祝。
And furthermore, I thought, why does Jesus even put in this part of the story about the older son? What does that have to do with the father being gracious to the young son?
为什么耶稣把这个大儿子这部分放在这个比喻里面
？Let's see. I think I'm going to hold this a minute. Let's go to the next slide.
让我们看下一个。
And I wonder if we can turn out the light so you can see a little more of this. This is... No. Do I have a pointer? Well, that's okay. This is very famous, one of the most famous paintings. This is Rembrandt's painting of the return of the prodigal son.
这是一个很有名的画家伦勃朗画的一个关于浪子这个故事的一个油画。
And some people say this may be the most famous piece of art ever done in Europe.
有人说这可能是在欧洲里面其中一个最有名的一个油画。
What do you see in this?
我们就可以在这个油画里面所画的东西，我们看到什么东西？